part to this comment. So, like this duality of, let's call them context likeness versus modularity being at the effect in parallel is kind of, I think the filter layer is a practical take on that. That's also, I think, a key, that it's really this sort of practical take, that something is like behaves like a layer, it's movable, which is very much this sort of modularity. In a way, it's a, you could say that it's a kind of a thing that to a certain extent these text editors like Notion, Obsidian kind of do that part, but then there's context likeness, which is that you would have this fertility of the fields and even every module being a field. This is also important. Is a, I think, a key playing piece, but then also the fact that the filter layer turns it into practical, like in this very kind of concrete sense of whenever I add something, it behaves like a layer that I can move it around, turn it off, and that behaves like a filter. Like I added these glasses next to this, I'm now thinking how they co-affect, like, which is kind of thinking like I added a piece on a game board. How is the game changed by that? And how is the piece changed by that? Yeah.
Yes.
I think another, probably we won't have time to go through all of them, but I do think there's this area which I titled op, or short for operations, is kind of key. And this we didn't go last time, so when you were here, Martin, so I could just summarize it. Like this was my kind of potential solution to this, like the quandary, problematic of which things are rules. Because in a way you could say everything like we write can be kind of called rules, but then also you could make like these are the rules kind of a sense to things. But then there is a kind of a way to think about it, which was explicated or expressed in the sense of an op, which is, now every expression is by nature definition. Like it's defining something, and definition by nature is rule-like. It's ruling over something. At its minimal, it's ruling over itself. Like you could say this is also an example of how fiction behaves. It's fiction is defining something, but it's mostly kind of not making claims beyond itself. It's just claiming to itself. It's making references to, like if there is a fictional story of Berlin, it's making references to Berlin, but it's not claiming that Berlin is like what it says. But it's claiming itself. But and also it is also rule-like in the sense that the only way it exists is, well, somebody thinking about it, which is often said, but there are certain implications about that, which means that like even reading normal text is kind of getting rules and then operating through those rules. And this is the only way even the most conventional of text becomes existent. Like it's already following rules that you kind of take these words and use them to think in a certain way. It's actually in the same range of behaviors as you take in reading certain rules of a game and then using them to behave in a certain way. It's just much more split second, but it's not different. And this kind of places essentially all expression. I mean, certainly language-like expression, we can argue about the other cases, but I think ultimately all expression. But if we can stick to language for now. Well, that all language is behaving or is essentially rule-like in its behavior, and all of it is operational. Like it's about how you operate. uh, which um, which creates this another perspective. It's towards, say, like even normal text, but like any kind of text, also text that defines particular game rules, that they all actually are the sort of from the same range of behavior. And for me, that opens up the sense of actually there's no need to separate rules and non-rules. It's actually kind of useful to look at all of them as this sort of operational rule-like behavior, but then it's more about stylistics and nuances. And this also made me think of a particular saying that goes or is said often by game designers in the role-playing space, where they say like a role-playing book which has some rules in it, and then it describes the world history in a kind of normal fiction sense or normal writing sense. And there's this particular saying that all of this is rules, or at least all of this is setting. And I think what they're kind of intuitively trying to say with this is precisely this, that they actually all behave like rules towards the game you're about to play and the world it's taking place in. And I think the reason why game designers say it is because intuitively, because they're writing these games, they ultimately come to that point, that it's not about thinking that these are categorically different things. They are actually kind of in the same family of behavior, but they just differ by style.
Maybe adding to that just quickly in between is that like I just spoke now recently with a few folks again about my like work or what I used to be doing and so stuff. And like I've always thought that what I choose to do or what I happen to, you know, end up engaging with had always somehow model character. So like in the same sense as you say, like every bit of language has in some sense rule character.
Mm.
Could one just say that like every bit of practice has model or modeling character?
Mm.
I mean, I don't think it's kind of, it would be too far fetched, because basically if I'm in a situation either that I know or don't know, and I observe you or you observe me, we're basically, you know, as long as none of us kind of cries out and says that's impossible what you do, we're basically establishing a kind of a continuously growing model of what's possible, no?
Yes.
Don't we?
Yeah.
And so I think one can really think about this kind of, and maybe this is an interesting thing to kind of place, you know, just as a try, maybe next to one another and see what that wants to do.
Yes. Could you word it like how would you place it next to one another? Doesn't have to
I
be
mean,
serious.
if you, I have to check what's in the mirror right now. The man in the mirror. Yeah.
And the mirror in the man.
You. I mean, didn't I just kind of somewhat say it already?
You can make a different variation, like yeah. Like, and this area actually, like, if one starts to think from that point of view, if one takes this, like, all of these are like rule-like, also one could say model-like, there are some interesting consequences from this. Like if one takes that as a starting point, like if we think like that, what does it mean for, say, language? So first of all, it puts a really interesting, I don't think it's a sidetrack. It maybe slightly a kind of seems like a sidetrack notion, but I think it's talking about the same thing, which is that it kind of solves this whole fiction reality problem. It actually kind of puts them all in the same group. Because if everything is rule-like, then every time the question is, where is it claiming its rules to? So
the scope, so to speak.
yeah, like to take more clearly rule-like examples to make it kind of more apparent, you could say, for example, say one person says to another person, you should take the trash out. Then that person is claiming by that sentence something to the reality of the other person. Or if, say, a guard says to some teenagers, say 10 teenagers, that this place should be empty by 8. And then that is claiming to something to all those 10 teenagers. But also, if a person says, say not a guard, but let's keep the teenagers, and they just say out loud, like to some teenagers, that this place should be empty, which is not a command, but it's a kind of now claiming to the nature of the space, but it's still claiming, and then it's asking, appealing for those teenagers to agree with this nature of the place being defined. And then, like, if you start this rabbit hole, it's a huge one. It starts to think about the language always this sort of ecosystem of claiming, and which, by the way, then completely coheres with, like, if you bring in rules, like even board game rules, they totally track with this. Like, it's about, like, if some rule says you must move the red piece, it's like, oh, if I'm in the role of a player and there is this red piece, to that combined context, this thing is claiming a pattern too. So we actually get this sort of a perspective of analytics that does not separate rules and any other kind of expression, really, but kind of brings clarity to both, or a certain kind of extra resolution in a way. And once and then this question of, like we have this constant paradox on that the things that we treat as truths, like certain systems of nations, etc., or really any structure that we have up to something like laws of physics, all start out as kind of fiction, because at some point somebody has to propose them, and at that point they only exist to themselves, and then they are really in the same position as any piece of fiction. They are only kind of present for one person. But in this kind of model, it's not a problem. It's merely a question of where the claim expands to, where it expands to in terms of who's claiming it, and where it expands to in terms of how it's represented. And it's always like a question of that, which is then n-dimensional. There is no fiction or truth. There's merely what has claim over what.
This is very interesting. I'm just started kind of thinking that okay, if text has these like rule-like properties, then kind of it is also very interesting how the text can, so to say, empower the unsaid that remains unwritten, and in that sense, kind of how the text is able to create potentiality, and that somehow that is a property that emerges from the not only from the rules but also from the kind of the fiction or the worlds, multiple worlds, or so on, probably, maybe, and it's kind of so and if you kind of make a claim, and then and this comes from you, then there may be then there is someone else, some other actor that kind of then may refuse or negotiate or kind of barter or agree or so on. So it kind of made me think that from the world's perspective, kind of from the perspective of the structure, it is kind of it is a matter of kind of managing and sharing kind of access.
Yes.
In a sense.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and it also brings certain kind of hidden qualities, or at least mostly hidden qualities about language into fore. I'll make a practical example of this. So I'll make a sentence here. Like next to what Martin has written or is still writing, which is kind of like game-like and somewhat playful. All right, so then I'll make an arrow out of this, and I have to excuse my playfulness in this. So if you see, like, there is this Martin's in itself good and serious text, and I'm playing now with it by writing next to it, kind of like it's a normal text, but now it behaves like a game rule. It reads, this text here was written by yourself 5 years ago. Now, if you take this is very layer-like. Now this layer is claiming to this layer that Martin is writing, which is modular from it, is that you actually read it differently. And of course, because it says yourself, it would be different for us. But if you take it as a rule and you take its claim, then the text changes. The filter affects it. So it is already producing game qualities, but there's all the expressions are kind of not in a kind of clearly recognizable game-like language. But why this is easy to do once you start thinking about it is precisely because of this quality. It's precisely this sort of claiming and how everything is rule-like in nature that this simply works. Like that yes, like if I read that, then this text actually becomes a different kind of board, to use game terms here, and is filtered through the other one, and suddenly it's kind of playful because the claim, this was written by yourself 5 years ago, pointing to this text as behaving like a filter, behaving like a layer, and behaving like a rule.
Now, maybe this is just where you were kind of going, like running toward with that last statement, but or not but, and so it's a question more like, so like what now if we say that, like what happens if we kind of assign, what happens if we kind of flatten, so to speak, the mechanics of language into this type of equivalence, as you do, right? You say, like, we can basically find all of this back as at a rule level, if we wish so to say, right? So you could also say, think of a poem in that way. You could think of any word that anybody dropped or that you read on a quitte in that way.
It's a what was the word?
Quitte, like a receipt.
Like a receipt, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if it's embedded in this kind of domain of image, or like of a perception anyway, or like how to say, the question I was going to ask is like, if we now because this is a not yet settled case, but making the assumption as if we had now come to the point where we would kind of suggest that layering is a kind of unified, not unified, the other way around, kind of a base level, foundation level mechanic. Base level is
ontological in a way,
yeah, kind of. I mean,
or just generally useful. Like
no,
generally
I mean like really kind of a paradigmatic mechanic, like the rhizome would be one, like, you know, this type of thing. And what happens if we kind of then kind of, so to speak, distill down language to this kind of also its own singular paradigmatic, you know, I know this is probably extremely lossy what I'm trying to do here. I'm not really trying, I'm just asking myself whether like if there's a kind of, do we come to some kind of no, I think I retreat the thought, I guess, for the time being, which is of course being a layer not possible because it's
well, it is, and it isn't. Like you could say, like in a way, it doesn't disappear from our memory, but in a way, playfully, you can say you retreat it. And then,
playfully, I can. Then it's in a different rule set, so to speak, which you just said by playfully. Yeah, I get you.
But I think I know where you're going, and of course, that opens several cans of worms, and these things open, like, certainly several cans of worms. It's like it's essentially a different paradigmatic take on, well, all expression.
I'm just wondering if I really am interested in where I was thinking, where I think I was going at the moment, because somehow I think in the larger kind of radiation, so to speak, of that filter layer model, I think the thing that kind of excites me is that it's at the same time not reductive and manageable. So like one wouldn't need to come down to, you know, a singular mechanic. Because, you know, text and language and speech can just live in their own, you know, probably self-contradictory and like super problematic ways of wanting to do stuff while still being completely, you know, playing with the rest of all layers.
But there is, and this is why, this is another example why I think this approach is cohering or coming together, is because precisely what you said, there is a kind of another kind of answer to that, in that, do you come down to one mechanic or not? Because if all mechanisms are perspective, you don't have to answer one or the other. Like they are merely there if you entertain the perspective, so to speak, if you decide to stand upon those things. So, and they are kind of behaving like layer filters, of course. Like we could have this on and that on, or this on, and like it just creates a different situation. It's not a question of which one of them is right. It's just a question.
This is super interesting. This is super interesting. So you come to a model where you kind of foreclose onto yourself the kind of almost possibility or capacity to kind of ultimately decide on what's the mechanic at play without ending up in
like a finite.
Yeah, you're not ending up either in a, so certainly you don't have a finite suggestion, because you disallow yourself from saying this is the ultimate mechanic, but at the same time you don't end up in indifference, because you can still name them. You kind of basically circularly toggle between these perspectives while you don't know if one holds the other up or the other holds the one up. Like, I think that's mega awesome. Like, I love that very much. Like this kind of, this is, I said that word, I'm super interested right now in this kind of foundationlessness, like this, like thinking of things without having to base them on something. Because for me, this is kind of this is the point, I think, Pekko, that I took away most strongly, maybe from our residency conference interactions there, where this yeah, I don't know, I can't now, I could with a bit more time maybe construct and frame back, maybe it's not so interesting, but like just this kind of like try to, if you think, because this has to me to do very much with future. If you, because there was this kind of making an impact on the base layer, and like, so you always think kind of backward. You always think like, okay, if I do that, how would it impact the real world? You know? But if you have a system of mechanic, or not system, I don't know, like a kind of, you know, set of mechanics between whose validity you can kind of at will toggle from one moment to the other without knowing which one is suspended from the other, and without kind of defining or having to determine which one is the ultimate that describes all the others, then you're basically at that point where you need to know. Yeah, I love that very much.
And it's all of that, and it's still possible to create finiteness. It's possible to say, no, this is on and that is not on, which is the kind of matter of the scene and the setting and why they're there. It's possible.
How you get meaning in the first place, right?
Yeah. And this was the kind of double play we were talking about with Pablo, about the setting having two meanings, like the setting of, I don't know, Cyberpunk or Star Wars or whatever, and the settings of a computer, and how they actually kind of, it's fitting that they are the same concept, that in a way, like what you're providing with this, like, hey, like, let's put this on and that on, or here's my expression and I'm turning this on and that on, and I'm communicating that to you as a calibration, as a configuration. It's possible, but it's just a configuration. It's out of the kind of openness of possibilities. So while there is this whole openness in the context, there is still possibility to finite it down, because that can be a manner of expression in itself. It's possible to say this calibration, this configuration, these settings.
I'm still stuck in kind of thinking about language and its how relations with rules and also practices and so on. Kind of if you think about, let's say, the layeredness of the practice of language, kind of. If you think of, let's say, writing as a practice in creating text that can then be read as language, and these all these, like, they have to be kind of recognized, interpreted as kind of as hey, I am writing, I am creating, I am reading. You don't have to, but in order to kind of read them as some sort of like rules or agreements, you have to kind of be conscious in kind of at some point, at some level, and so on. And I come to think that that's been said many times earlier, but kind of it's also about then kind of what sort of like what sort of frames you bring up. What are can you kind of bring up interesting differences between the materials, and also interesting like patterns and so on, and how you kind of lay them out in layer them out in time and space, kind of.
Yes, very much so. And like it's about the can you make them in an interesting fashion, fertile fashion? And in a way, we've used that all along. Like when we read some text, it's ultimately a matter of whether it's interesting to us or fertile to us. It's kind of just bringing us to the kind of evaluation points where we are already in. But it's kind of more making it more explicit, like in a way, like it's that's the kind of like clearly the evaluator here. And there are these like wide visions, but there's also interesting practicality. Like I continued these examples of the rule likeness just next to violating Martin's text by making claims to it, but in a playful manner.
Go to town.
Yeah, like I made another one which reads more like a rule because it says read this in, but it's a poetic rule because it reads this in a sunbird yellowish mood. And there's a couple of things I just want to highlight here. Now, like, especially with the first one, this was written by yourself 5 years ago. This already turned this into a board gamey-like situation, even though there's no kind of rules written with that. But or game-like situation, that the text starts to behave like a board. It's not merely a matter of their composition, but it's kind of like, oh, this, if I switch this setting on, if I take this was written by yourself 5 years ago, then this text is changed by this layer filter. But then, of course, like, even though the other one read this as written like a rule, it's by behavior not really different than the earlier one, because they both are ultimately rule-like in behavior. So the fact that we can read this as an imperative, that doesn't make it different, which is reflecting this, how everything is rule-like. And then secondly, also the rule-like is the one that has something, one doesn't have to call it poetic, but maybe metaphoric is a good one. Like it's written in this, like there's no right, certainly no right solution here kind of mode, but very, very far from that. But there, sorry?
Evocative, maybe.
Yeah, also. But this is not a problem. Like combining the rule and making that into this sort of, like having this poetic language is not a problem. Once again, for this reason that this is all rule-like. So that means that these sort of poetics are in this. It's merely kind of moving the let's say the nature of claiming into more turning the mirror towards you and your operation. Like it's saying, like, actually now this is the task for you, the player, to kind of formulate this. I'm not even trying to conventionalize this meaning, but I'm kind of leaving you this sort of, you have to rely on your own interpretation of the metaphoricness of it.
I'm wondering if it's for me a moment to retreat right now, even though this is at full go and very fun.
We can have a generally short session. How you, Mikael? I mean, we have in this session the recorded and the pre-recorded part. I think actually kind of hidden on very large topics which have a lot, which offer a lot to think about. And I think it's quite possible to kind of take them for a digestion in a way.
Yeah, under these circumstances of the things happening outside, in the outside world, I think that might be very good and really left a lot to think, and also gave some keys in order to go and read more about more from the mirror board. So I'm very happy.
Yeah, and I do think, like, even though there is more, we hit upon some like some of the most fertile knot points. Like, and it's good that there was this allusion, like how there's still like a reason for these things like settings potentially to exist. But I do think like I cannot of course be sure, but it sounds that I'm very much in agreement of both with you, Mikael and Martin, in terms of what seems to be intriguing here, like what seems to be kind of fertile. And just to highlight that still like this intriguing is still very, very light. Like, I mean, you can open it into all kinds of theoretical perspectives, but there is something very light, which is kind of what was happening in the earlier sessions. They were doing this already. And what I was doing in the last few weeks was like kind of like analyzing, okay, why is it happening in this manner? And this lightness is for me very what enthusiasm inducing, because that means that there is like structures that don't have to, you know, necessarily be written in hundreds of pages. There's something for in this very simple play structures, even though hundreds of pages could be written about it. And that induces enthusiasm towards the structures in me.
And I think maybe if we're wrapping up at this moment, are we? Then I
Yes,
think
I
that
think so.
would maybe be a nice note on which to end the enthusiasm inducing, because we've been now thinking, I will say this for the record, on the record, it's the day today after which Russian forces began attacking Ukraine in February 2022. And I speak for myself only, but it's been a tough, it's a tough moment right now to deal with.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking for myself, what is it that I'm doing and how does my life and my practice figure in this context? And it's a question that I think is impossible to answer at this point. The thing that I maybe came up with is to say that I haven't formulated this through, obviously, but that there are some aspects of life, of what we do, that are hope-inducing and that provides a kind of node of, you know, why one wants to do things and why one wants to see further. And I've for the past, I don't know what year or what, that we've been having these conversations here, I've been experiencing these as one of the most, like, for me personally, most precious experiences, and I feel that something is kind of shared. We also kind of emerging. Pablo is not here with us today, or Jakob is not here, and Linda is also missing due to reasons. Pablo is demonstrating at this moment against that war. I myself will be going tomorrow. Maybe we could find each other. I know that you're all Turko and Evan. I think, yeah, this is, I have nothing to say. I just want to acknowledge the time at which we are talking and maybe make visible that there is, that anyway, to me, I'm trying to kind of somehow reconcile what is going on with what I do and bring that into kind of some perspective. I do not need conclusive, at this point, certainly not, but just to kind of, I don't know, just as a note, what's going on. And I think it's really saddening what's happening right now, and trying to kind of live with that, or maybe even against that, in a way that is enthusiasm inducing. That would maybe be the worst.
Yeah, thanks for that acknowledgement. I think it has certainly its place. I mean, like personally, I can say I was thinking about today's session maybe in a similar color. I was not sure about it, like, and also kind of mentally drained by the current situation a bit. But I often, like, of course, like looking at different problematic situations, my answer is like, actually, and I certainly not claiming this to everybody else. I'm claiming it only for myself, but I had the sense that the best I can give to the world ultimately is something that is kind of very close to myself, like that something like that is tries to be an expression that is trying to bring something to the world in itself, like, and it's not the only thing I can do. It's not in exclusion of practical things, but I don't think it's an accident that many interesting and beautiful things have been born in times of war, and that there is this also this, in addition to the practical phenomena, there is this sort of self-reflection or reflection in general, like reflection of humanity in itself. And I think both are valuable. And I think in human realms, it's not about one or the other, but it's kind of how to live in a marriage of both. That it's both doing something practically, if there is a possibility for it, and if there is a effect one perceives from it, and then also looking at it as a question of what is it, how is it to be a human, and what one can kind of find out of those reflections. So yeah, like, I think for that reason, often in these moments, I find myself like pushing forward to kind of leave noise behind, this sort of social noise, whether it's social media, etc., and kind of go to both directions, from that kind of everyday routine layer towards deeper, and then towards also higher or closer to people as well. So yeah, I feel that these kind of things are important, and at the same time, the things that are practical are important, both of them.
Thanks, both of you. And I just wish you well, and take care, and I'm sure we will see each other again in a week or so, and it's great thing that that kind of that you, Martin, and Pekka, that you bring these thoughts and feelings here. I think it's kind of it is very good thing for the whole XORG as well, in order to kind of be able to express what you are actually feeling right now. I can totally relate to what you guys said, and I do not have any more words. I think I just wish that we can all be well and do some good things for the community as a whole, by which I think I mean the whole world, and it's everyone here.
Yeah, agreed. And with that, I will stop